episode 19, Book of Mormon, Mosiah 7 through 10. And I'm Farrell.
And I'm Rhonda Pickering.
And we're going to address a big question that seems to be addressed in these chapters of Mosiah. And I'm going to ask the big question, are we in bondage? They talk a lot about bondage in these chapters, about the bondage that comes upon Zeniff's and Noah's people because of transgression. And we're going to talk about that a little. But before we go there, I'm going to have Rhonda take just a moment and do a quick overview of the time scale, which we put up. And we were grateful to Book of Mormon Study Notes blog for this timetable.
Well, the reason I love this timetable is because those circles there, those are the chapters. And so you can see just at a glance that King Benjamin's speech that we just did, chapters 1 through 6, we're now going to have Limhi in the land of Nephi meet Ammon, who was sent from Zarahemla, and chapters 7 and 8. And you can see that that's right under King Benjamin, because King Benjamin, Mosiah is the one that, Mosiah the second is the one that sends them out. But then you can see that in chapters 9 and 10, we go back 80 years. Okay, so we've gone back 2 generations to their grandfather, 80 years before, and then we start picking up Limhi's narration of what happened, what led them into bondage. So I like this chart because it's got the 3 different lands. It's got Alma and the land of Helaman, and it's got Zenith and Noah and Limhi in the land of Nephi, and then it's got
the overlaps.
Mosiah the first, King Benjamin, Mosiah the second in Zarahemla. But the cool thing is it not only shows you everybody zigzagging back and forth, but it shows you the chapters that tell those tales. And
that was wonderful, even for me.
Because really
I actually spent a lot of time making sure I had that down pat in my head.
Right.
And it's really cool how it's all pointing to almost a summation time where King Mosiah goes on a mission to the Lamanites, which is fascinating all of itself.
Yes, absolutely. So we're going to be talking a lot.
Mosiah's kids, I guess, or his sons.
Right. The sons of Mosiah the second and Alma the younger are going to go back on the mission. So that won't come until chapter 26. You can see there. But there's just one other thing that I think that is really important to notice as you see when we get to chapter 25, all of these groups are going to meet up back in Zarahemla, and we're going to have their stories in chapters 9 through 22. It's going to be covering all these stories. But the important thing to realize as you're going through these stories is that there's generally 2 groups of people. There's Limhi, who has inherited covenant curses because of unfaithfulness through his father, King Noah. Zenith actually was able to fight back a little bit because they hadn't become wicked yet. And so the covenant curses didn't fall until King Noah's day.
Well, he did have a lot of conflict in his early days.
Well, of course, and they're going to have to fight to not be under the Lamanite control, but they're not taken into bondage until Limhi's time after Noah, right?
But they do have a lot of bloodshed in Zenith.
Absolutely. But what we're going to talk about is this whole scenario that's going on for them in the land of Nephi, where they don't really listen to Abinadi, they don't repent until they suffer the bondage and everything. Whereas we're going to compare that as we go along to Alma and his group in the land of Helam. They get taken into bondage too, but it's a completely different scenario. They don't have all the bloodshed. They don't have it. It's the level of covenant that they're keeping. So you have 2 groups of people being represented by 2 different levels of covenant keeping. And you just have to ask yourself.
You kind of have 3. You have Zarahemla, Nephi. And
Right. Yeah. But I'm talking about the groups that are going to come back and join into Zarahemla. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that Mormon is including these chapters for a reason. And it's not just historical. There's plenty of other historical stuff he could have told us about. But he seems to be focusing on 2 groups of people, the ones that...
I'd almost say 3 branches.
Right. And the ones that repent because of the afflictions that come upon them, and the ones that repent before the afflictions come upon them. And they're going to have two different outcomes. They're both going to get saved back to Zarahemla, but they have to experience different things according to the level that they kept covenant. And I think that is the parallel for our day.
Laughingly say, let's do it Farrell's way today.
Okay, let's do
Okay.
it.
Okay.
I like it. I love your way.
Okay, so we're going to start with Mosiah 7, which is, again, we're going to start with the first couple of verses here, just because it's kind of context. And now it came to pass that after King Mosiah had continual peace for the space of 3 years, he was desirous of knowing or concerning the people that went in and dwelled in the land of Lehi Nephi, or the city of Lehi Nephi. Or his people had heard nothing from them from the time they left the land of Zarahemla. Therefore, they wearied him with their teasings, meaning people wanted to know what happened to their relatives, probably. And so they kind of kept pestering Mosiah to say, let's find out what happened to him. And it came to pass that King Mosiah granted 16 of their strong men mighty to go to the land of Lehi Nephi and inquire concerning their brethren. This is just a case where the people would talk to King Mosiah and say, "Hey, we want to know." And so he sends out a party of that go out and kind of try to seek out what happened to them. That's the context.
I was going to say in Omni, it's Amaleki, and I'm reading Omni verse 30, and I, Amaleki, had a brother who went with them, and I have not since known concerning them, and I'm about to lie down and go to my grave. So there's a lot of them
who wonder what's going on.
Yeah, what happened to them.
Extended families. Okay? And it came to pass on the morrow they started to go up, having with them one Ammon. Now, this is not the Ammon, Mosiah's son. This is a different Ammon, probably that Mosiah's son was named after, I'm going to guess.
Possibly,
maybe.
Yeah.
That's possible. Anyway, he being a strong and mighty man. That's an interesting phrase. It's talked about a lot, And a descendant of Zarahemla, and he was also their leader. So this Ammon is their leader. And now they knew not the course that they should travel in the wilderness up to the land of Lehi Nephi. Therefore they wandered many days in the wilderness, even 40 days did they wander. And they had wandered 40 days. They came to a hill which was in the north of the land of Shelom, and there they pitched their tents. This 40-day time frame is a fascinating. I threw this picture of Christ,
40.
Christ in his 40 days where he was in the wilderness. This is almost a purging time that people go through figuratively. Moses, I mean, there's so many. This is kind of I highlighted it in red because this is kind of a marker that this 40 days was a seasoning time for the search party.
So in Gematria, which is the study of numbers and their meaning in Hebrew, the number 40, it always designates a period of trial that ends in victory.
Yes.
So
this victory didn't come immediate.
Right.
But I thought it would be really fun to put Christ in the wilderness in this context, partially because we just got back from Jerusalem. And we're definitely in that mindset where we've enjoyed such an outpouring of spiritual and contextual feast about the Holy Land. I mean, it's just more than you can almost take in. We've had such a blessing in that regard. But I think about that 40 and the symbology of it. It's in the story. I mean, they mention it twice, almost in a chiastic, that they're wandering in the middle of the 40 days.
And it rained 40 days and 40 nights at the time of Noah, and the children of Israel wandered in the wilderness for 40 years.
Yeah.
And
contextually, there's a linking here that shows you this is a time of
getting aligned with God.
Yeah, getting alignment is a good way to put it, I guess. Okay, I need to give you some context to this jump ahead because we can't cover every verse. So now Ammon has met King Limhi, and Limhi is first quite unsettled about them coming until he finds out that they came from Zarahemla.
Well, he thinks that they're part of the wicked high priest that they've been hunting for.
Exactly.
He's ready to execute them.
Yeah, he's kind of, and it's interesting that there's another figurative, and maybe I should have put that in there, that they spent 2 days in prison and they get let out on the third day. That's another contextual thing we could explore. of the types and shadows of being freed on the third day. It's a lot of us who, or a lot of you who have watched our stuff, that on the third day he will revive us, so to speak, the house of Israel in a full sense of the word, in a millennial day.
Well, Ammon's just glad he's letting him tell his story before he gets executed.
And he gives Ammon voice, and then Ammon tells him he's from Zarahemla, and now they're in a different position. But Limhi starts to tell Ammon their grievous position. And he says, "For behold, we are in bondage to the Lamanites, are taxed with a tax which is grievous to be borne. And now behold, our brethren will deliver us out of our bondage, and out of the hands of the Lamanites, and we will be their slaves, for it is better that we be slaves to the Nephites than pay tribute to the king of the Lamanites." So he's saying, we're willing, if they come and rescue us, to be their slaves in order to get out from under this bondage we're in to the Lamanites. And yet they had a degree of autonomy. And I'm going to go into that because, they had been, they just had to keep paying their taxes, so to speak. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, if I can make one little comment, because I know that you're going to go into the taxes and the bondage and everything, but I want to read verse 25 real quick. It says that, "For if this people had not fallen into transgression, the Lord would not have suffered this great evil should come upon them." And so it's...
I think I'm going to go there.
Are you going to go there and talk about how bondage is a covenant curse?
Yes, very much. I think we're going to go there, and you can add if you choose that's suitable.
Sorry to jump the gun.
Yeah. You like to do that.
Yeah.
I do too. But and all this he did for the sole purpose of bringing this people into subjection or into bondage. We're talking the king of the Lamanites now. "And behold, we at this time do pay tribute to the king of the Lamanites in the amount of 1/2 of our corn and our barley, and all of our grains and every kind, and 1/2 of the increase of our flocks and herds, and even 1/2 of all we have or possess, the king of the Lamanites doth extract of us or our lives." 1/2. Well, then he goes on to say, so it's 50% tax. And now, is this grievous? Is this not grievous to be borne? Is not this our great affliction? Now behold, how great reason have we to mourn. So they're in a 50% tax bracket, and they have much reason to mourn. And you remember what I started this whole thing on? Are we in bondage? He's saying that they're in bondage, the Lamanite, because they're in a 50% tax bracket. Guess what, folks? If you take our combined taxes and you take the highest level of the federal income tax plus Social Security tax, which the employers have to match, the highest level comes out to 52% on a federal level alone. Now, obviously, we're not all in that high of tax bracket. But if you even went back to an average tax bracket, we'll talk about that in a minute. State income tax average in America is about 5.5, sales tax about 7.25, and property tax on the average is about 5%. That puts the higher tax bracket is in a 75% tax bracket. Now, if you just dropped that federal income tax down to an average, you're still around a 50% tax bracket.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the question in my mind that maybe other people are thinking too. Is this apples to apples? I mean, because you would say, well, the state income tax, well, they fix our roads. Did the Lamanites fix their roads, or did they just take 50%? I mean, what? Well, is it apples to apples?
Well, yeah, but notice that the overall average there. And I forgot to include fuel tax. You talk about fixing the roads. There is a monstrous gas tax on all the gallons of gas you got. I didn't put that in there. So the answer is the roads aren't included in that. Okay.
All right, I'm thinking in my head, well, wait a minute. So supposedly our taxes are supposed to be helping us, right?
Well, that's the concept that they're selling. I mean, but all I'm simply trying to tell you is I'm just asking the question. You can answer the question. I'm just going to report. You decide. I like Wayne May's statement. Are we in the most clever bondage that the world has ever known? Because we've decloaked it in all the ways you say.
Right.
And all you got to do is look at career politicians, and there's something here. I mean, in all this, and I'm just throwing this out, and you can answer the question for yourself: are we in bondage? Okay. Well, the people of Limhi did not necessarily have them breathing down their neck every day, as long as they paid taxes, right? But if you stop paying taxes, yeah, they're gonna be breathing down your neck, and that's the way the Lamanites were. Okay, I don't want to overly do that, but I just want to address the question: are we in bondage?
Oh, look, you did the verse.
I know.
Sorry.
You jumped the gun on me.
Here we go
sometimes,
again.
assuming.
Verse 25.
Okay. But I'm going to jump out of that subject. You can be thinking about that. No, we're going to talk about what she's talking about, which is why. Why does bondage come? Why do we find ourselves somewhat oppressed at times? And granted, America's not as oppressed as some, but I was playing the average. California's tax, for instance, is 6 or 7% more than what I just showed. New York too. Some of these really states like that are even more tax. I mean, if you were making in the highest tax bracket, you'd be paying close to 80% of your income in taxes. Mind blowing, just mind blowing. And Limhi says this is very grievous that we're in this situation. So.
Well, he says it's grievous for that, but on top of that, he says in verse 24, for behold, how many of our brethren have been slain, and their blood has been spilt in vain, and all because of our iniquity. And
so you can answer that. I'm going to stop meddling. I'm just going to let you answer that question for yourself, and I'm sure different people have different answers. But let's jump to 25 and let's talk about why these kinds of bondage come about. And if this people had not fallen into transgression, the Lord would not have suffered that this great evil should come upon them. But behold, they would not hearken unto his words, but there arose contentions among them, even so much that they did shed blood amongst themselves. Are we not on this edge of contention amongst us? Almost to the shedding of blood.
This one's almost as painfully...
And we did that in the Civil War, but we're almost here again.
Right, this one is almost as painfully applicable to the situation we're in right now as those taxes.
Exactly. It's almost like it's a repeat
it's almost like Mormons saw our day, something like that.
It's kind of unnerving at times how the Book of Mormon can be so dead on to our current events. And a prophet of the Lord they have slain. Can you think of a prophet that got slain in our land? Yea, a chosen man of God, who told them of their wickedness and abominations, and prophesied of many things which are to come. Yea, even the coming of Christ. Wow. I'm just giving you the raw information here. You got to decide how you're going to handle this, whether you believe that this is similar. I mean, many people are in...
If you believe there's a civil war coming on our doorsteps.
A lot of these things, it's like we're reading current events about on our doorsteps on a lot of these things. Then we go into sometimes this hard situation where we get a look back to Abinadi. And then we're going to hit Abinadi more in our next lesson, I'm sure, with Rhonda. But we get a look back where he's talking about what they did to Abinadi that made this come upon them. So they're actually looking back to an event that happened previous. Limhi is talking about.
Yeah, we haven't done the flashback yet, but he's explaining why they're in bondage.
Yeah, he's explaining why. For if this people had not fallen into transgression, the Lord would not have suffered that this great evil should come upon them. And I duplicated that where you can see. So this great evil that has come upon them is because they have persecuted and killed the prophets, or the prophet in this instance, the prophet Abinadi. And, if the shoe fits, we have to take it very seriously.
What we're saying is that in a parallel, the wickedness and the secret combinations would get to a point that people would start revealing what's going on and they would be silenced.
some call it conspiracy, but there is stories like that exist already. So I'm just saying, in reality, you have to ask sometimes the hard questions in our day, and sometimes it's not fun to ask the hard questions. But I'm kind of the guy who sometimes goes there. Now, don't get me wrong. I believe in a beautiful, happy ending. I'm a happy ending guy. Okay. But I believe it's like every good novel or every good story. You have evil and conflict coming to a point of the climactic point of the story, and then you have the rescue of good by bold and brave and valiant individuals and the grace of God put into this question. And I believe we're walking into that exact scenario in our day. And so I actually look at it as, we're at the most, maybe you could call it some of the most intense times of the story, but we're in the greatest times of the story. In fact, we're in such a great time in the story that the prophets of old wanted to be here with us. Wow. Do you ever look at it that way? I have begun to. I used to have a lot of apprehension. I now want to sit next to the Abinadis, to the Isaiahs, to the people who have been valiant, even unto death. I want to be able to hold my head with them as friends. Do you? You have to ask yourself that question. Do you have the faith to go through what we're probably going to head into soon? Or you dread what's happening? Well, we all have a degree of that, right?
Can I cheat and jump ahead to a cross reference real quick in chapter 12? I know it's not in the block.
Go for it.
But I just want to, we're talking about Isaiah, we're talking about Abinadi, we're talking about people that are brave, that people that say, here am I, send me, no matter what the mission is. And I just want to point out that Abinadi knew that, because in chapter 12, verse 1, it said, thus hath the Lord commanded me, saying, Abinadi. And this is after they've already thrown him out. And then 2 years later, he comes back in disguise, right? And thus the Lord commanded me, saying, Abinadi, go and prophesy unto this people, for they have hardened their hearts. Exact same thing with Isaiah. They have repented not of their evil doings, and they're about to get judged. Give them a last warning. And the men that do that go in.
That's the crowd I'd like to hang with if I can.
They go into the wickedness and they give that last warning no matter what it costs them. That is actually the context of a verse that we quote all the time. And we rip that verse out of its context. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think so.
Amos 3, verse 7. The Lord will do nothing save he reveal it to his servants, the prophets. And we say, well, that means that God's hands are tied and he can't do anything unless he asks somebody permission first. And that is a flip over of what that verse is saying. In Amos chapter 3, Jerusalem is about to get destroyed. And the Lord says, I would never destroy.
Without turning Jeremiah first,
sending the prophets
or Isaiah first, or I would
warn them. That's the context.
Or Abinadi,
and that's what Abinadi is doing.
Exactly, he's carrying out that word of warning, and we have that happening in our day too. Sometimes we just put the blinders on. We don't want to see what's coming because we are just like the court of King Noah. We think, oh man. Everything.
And these men,
eat, drink, and be merry.
And these men that are willing to go in at the cost of their lives to save whoever will listen. And in this case, Alma listens.
Yeah, and we get the beautiful story of Alma,
yeah.
and this whole rescue that takes place from Abinadi's sacrifice, and a whole people that hear the call. It's beautiful, actually.
Well, even Limhi and them, when they get judged, they at least can attribute their judgment to what they did, right?
Exactly. Now, in the next verses here, it says, what Abinadi was in trouble for saying. Okay, it's going into what he's in trouble for saying. And this is just mind-blowing to some. And sometimes it becomes
incredible to me.
Yeah, it's incredible, but sometimes you get some arguments coming against us in Mormondom. I'm not supposed to use that word. In us in the Church of
The
Jesus Christ, the
restoration.
Restoration probably is a good way to say it. We get accused of taking Christ out of his role, which is I don't believe is true. He actually does the role he's in. That's what we get accused of at times. And I just want to read what Mosiah says about this. And because he said unto them that Christ was the God, the Father of all things, and said that he should take upon him the image of a man, and it should be in the image of after a man was created in the beginning. So when he came and was born of Mary in Bethlehem, Ephratah. Yeah, the whole nother story. The fruitful, and we're going to put up other videos about our
Bethlehem
trip
Ephratah.
to the real Bethlehem. And I know we're going to create lots of waves, but oh well. That he was created.
We always create.
Yeah, I know. Created after the image of God, and that God should come down amongst the children of men and take upon him flesh and blood, and go forth upon the face of the earth. Wow. God would.
I think Abinadi created a lot of waves.
Yeah, obviously he created.
I mean, what he's saying there, that God himself, when I
would
read
fill
that,
the covenant.
when I read that, it's like, wait a minute, it has to be that way because
Exactly.
they made the covenant with God.
Exactly. The
has to
Sinai
be
was made with
him that will fulfill it.
Yep. And now because he said this, they did put him to death. And many more things did they do which brought down the wrath of God upon them. Wherefore, who wondereth that they are in bondage and that they are smitten with sore affliction? So he's saying this is why is the rejection of Christ and the killing of a prophet or prophets. Well,
Another thing that's fascinating is that when they later on in Mosiah, when they decide in the beginning of Alma, when they decide to do away with kingship, they're going to use this as the prime number one example of why we don't want kings. Because when you get a wicked king Noah, therefore the people suffer the affliction and the bondage as the result of the decisions that were made by the wicked king.
by the wicked leader. We can take the word king out of it because king sometimes, even though it means the same thing, sometimes and I don't want to cloud the soup, but in essence, I'm trying to say leaders make a difference. Bad leaders make a big difference.
When the wicked rule, the
And
people suffer.
and unfortunately, bad leaders use laziness and they dangle carrots to get popularity. Okay, bad leaders offer free lunches to the masses in order to control the masses. It's the whole entitlement mentality, and we're going to get into that here in a minute also, because this entitlement mentality is what leads to bad leaders. I experienced that in big scale this last week, but I'm not going to go into that. So Mosiah
Well, I'm
7:30.
clueless, so you
Oh,
better at
I'm
least
just
give
talking
me
about.
context.
I'm talking about when we become so entitlement minded that we think we have been wronged. And we're going to hit this hard.
Well, I'm going to hit that one.
We're going to hit it real hard
Yeah,
here in a minute.
yeah.
And now the promises of the Lord is fulfilled, and ye are smitten and afflicted. And if you will turn to the Lord with full purpose of heart, and put your trust in him, and serve him with all diligence of mind, if ye do this, he will, according to his own will and pleasure, deliver you out of bondage. There's our promise. We just need to turn back to the Lord.
So the question is, what is his own will and pleasure?
I personally think his whole goal is to bring to pass the immortality and eternal life of man, and man is that he might have joy.
Right. And so
Okay.
it says according to his own will and pleasure. What that means is that people have different levels of covenant keeping. And all you have to do is serve him and keep covenant, and bam, he will keep his
His,
part of the bargain. He
he'll keep
will
his end of the
deliver
deal.
us.
And we're going to go into this a little more as we go. And he caused that Ammon should stand up before them all and rehearse unto them all that had happened to their brethren from the time the zenith went up out of the land, even to the time that he himself came out of the land. We're talking of Zarahemla now. And he rehearsed unto the last words of King Benjamin had taught them, and explained to them the people of King Limhi, so that they might understand all the words which he spake. So he's talking about this righteous example compared to the unrighteous
So he
example.
read to them Mosiah chapters 1 through 6.
Yeah,
King Benjamin's
King
speech.
Benjamin's speech, which, it's just beautiful when you start to get the connection and the contrast. Righteous king, evil king. Righteous king, obviously, the ultimate example is our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
But King Benjamin is a pretty top of the deck human one.
Yeah, well, Christ is human, but I mean, he's a pretty top of the deck.
All right.
Okay, pretty top of the deck of the pile. Okay.
He's my
Probably
hero.
a better form or analogy we could use. But anyway, so when we talk about this, that he stands up and rehearses for the multitude, he's teaching them the correct principles that they needed to understand, and that they needed to understand in order to, I'm going to use the word, be able to self-govern.
Yes.
Bondage comes when you can't self-govern, when you have no personal discipline. If you lack personal discipline and you are in the blame game, I love the way somebody described blame to me. Just separate it. Be lame. I love that context. That when we take responsibility for our lives, for the lives of our families, we get out of the entitlement perspective. And I can say that, and I'm going to prove it, I think, with the Book of Mormon here, and just as we get later on in this discussion, that it actually is very much a product of one another. And it came to pass that that the plates which contained the records of his people from the time that they left the land of Zarahemla should be brought before Ammon, that he might read them. So Limhi's letting Ammon catch up on the story of Abinadi and all these different parts.
Well, let me really quick back up, because there's one more story that slipped in here.
I'm about to get to it.
You're talking about where they got those plates?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And now, as soon as Ammon had read the record, they inquired of him to know if he could interpret languages. And Ammon told him he could not. Why does he asking Ammon if he can interpret languages? Well, that's the next step that Rhonda's talking about. In Mosiah,
the 43 guys?
9:3, the king sends out people into the land north.
43 guys.
Trying to find Zarahemla.
Yeah.
They get lost and they find the land of desolation, in essence. They find the land of desolation, and they find the plates of the Jaredites, and they have this.
They find the remains of the Jaredites.
And the remains. And they actually find one living, right?
Actually, Corey Entmer is going to show up later.
You're right.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that's in the later story.
Right.
But anyway, and for the testimony that the things that they had said are true, they have brought 24 plates, which were filled with engravings, and they are of pure gold. And behold, also they have brought breastplates, which are large, and they are of brass and of copper, and are perfectly sound. And again, they have brought swords and hilts thereof have perished, and the blades thereof were cankered with rust. And there is no one in the land that is able to interpret the language or the engravings that are on the plates. Therefore I said unto thee, canst thou translate? So he's saying, hey, I got these records that these people brought back from this land of desolation in the north. I need somebody to translate. I want to know what happened to these people. What happened? Why does this people just get wiped out? And this brings us to a very interesting commentary that is made by Ammon at this time. You have something you want to add right there?
Well, I just want to say that, when the sealed records come forth, I'm looking forward to reading the rest of the 24 gold plates. Because Moroni, clear in the book of Ether, is going to say, "But behold, I give not the full account, but a part of the account I give from the tower down into the time they were destroyed." So there is a whole creation account. There's a whole, all the way down to the Tower of Babel on those gold plates, that is part of the records that will come forth.
And if you remember right, a couple of years ago, I was getting into the Hebrew a lot. And quite often, there are such multi-layer meanings in the same phrase that you can actually get much more from the record than you can read on the surface, even still. So that's kind of what this is saying, that there's so much information possible to be gleaned in pure language.
Well, and the Book of Mormon is almost, except for that first section of the small plates, almost all the rest of the Book of Mormon is an abridgment. And they are selecting the parts that we need to hear.
So let's go into this conversation that King Limhi and Ammon are having. Now Ammon said to him, "I can assuredly tell thee, O king, of a man that can translate the records. For it has written that he can look and translate all records that are of ancient date. And it is the gift from God, and the things are called interpreters. And no man can look except he be commanded, lest he should look, for that he ought not, and he should perish." So he's saying, hey, there is a man that can do this and read these plates, but it's not me.
Well, I just had a wonder.
What's a wonder?
A wonder that when the sealed records come forth, I mean, that would be such a bummer if it was like them when nobody could read them. And so, does the
Somebody
Urim
has
and
to come.
Thummim come forth with them? How do they read the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon?
And this is a big question. And who is commanded to look at them, the same is called a seer.
Wow.
And behold, the king of the people who are in the land of Zarahemla is the man that is commanded to do these things, and who has the high gift of God. And the king said that a seer is greater than a prophet. Now, we know in our day, we sustain the prophet, seer, and revelator, and we say those words: prophet, seer, and revelator. I would add to that, though, in latter days, since Joseph Smith, we haven't seen records translated. The gift of the seer has not been used, really, since Joseph Smith, pretty much. We have not had...
That's what it was like. Wow, when the sealed
portion... We have not had those keys or those things take place.
Well, there's levels of seers, yes.
Sure.
Granted, we're talking about the top.
Well, I'm talking about this record of ancient records. I venture, if our conjectures be true, that might happen in the next 3 or 4 years. We might see these things again. We might see the gift of seership.
Well, let me just explain that. What we're saying is that in order for the house of Israel to be restored and the Lamanites to be converted and the Jews to be converted and convinced that the records are true, the records have to come forth. And they have to be translated.
By the power.
And that would be
of the seer.
Right? Okay.
And that is the highest, is that seership and revelator. That is the keys we're talking about. That is when they're acting in the fullness of their calling. And that's pretty cool. That we might see that soon.
Well, I'm just reading Ammon's definition of a seer. Are you going to go there?
I can't remember if I go there or not. But
it says, and a seer is a revelator and a prophet also, and a gift which is greater no man can have, except he should possess the power of God.
So there you go. I didn't put that in there, but I'm glad you did.
But
it goes on to say...
We start talking at the same time.
But Who's on the table? You or me?
You're the boss.
Okay, so, but a seer can know of things which are past and also things which are to come, and by them shall all things be revealed, or rather, shall secret things be manifest, and hidden things shall come to light, and things which are not known shall be made known, and also things shall be made known by them which otherwise could not be known. This is pretty incredible. We're talking about literally the restoration of all the same types of things that Joseph Smith did is when these keys start to be used again in fullness. Probably soon. That's my hunch. I could be wrong, but my hunch is this is about
There's so
to
many.
make a big splash.
There's so many players on the stage.
Yes. Thus God has provided a means that man through faith, mighty work, mighty miracles, therefore he becometh a great benefit to his fellow beings. So the whole purpose is defined there. The whole purpose of seership, of revelators, is to bless his fellow
Become
beings.
a great benefit to his fellow beings.
Yeah, that's why you get these gifts, not to be all high and mighty. You get these gifts to serve.
And the reason it's a great benefit is because it's the words of God. It's scripture.
Absolutely. And I put one of the greatest miracles up here just to put it into the light. Mighty miracles. The crossing of the Red Sea is probably up there at the pretty high end of the mighty miracles that are taking place. And I suspect that we're not too far out from seeing mighty miracles again. I mean, we all have seen miracles. I know I've seen many of them in even the last 6 weeks. But we're talking on a whole different scale here. When we're talking mighty miracles that are about to come forth.
I hope I'm not taking you off tangent here, but to me, when you look at the parting of the Red Sea, you look at the children of Israel, and we're the children of Israel, this extraordinarily faithful people that never messed up.
Not hardly.
Not hardly. And so you're saying, well, what precipitates the mighty miracle? And I would just propose that it's an appointed time.
Yes.
And that the miracles are not because of our worthiness. It's because the Father is preparing to do a marvelous work and a wonder that
At a
the
new
coming
level.
forth of the first part of the Book of Mormon was stage 1. Stage 2 is going to happen because it's God's work. And he will show
His mighty hand.
his mighty hand.
Yes. And I think that's beautiful. It fits right in because I think we are coming into some pretty incredible appointed times. Now, he goes into why this state of affairs comes about. Now they were a lazy and idolatrous or idleness people. Therefore, they were desirous to bring us into bondage, that they might glut themselves with the labors of our hands. Now, I would propose
Of course,
to
we're
you.
talking about the Lamanites.
Yeah, this is not current
We
events.
just did the 80-year flashback.
This is not current events at all. We don't have lazy parasites.
Oh,
around
wait.
us.
I think it's like in parallel to us.
Nah, that don't happen. There's no lazy, idolatrous politicians out there
That want to glut off of the taxes of the
yeah,
people.
the people. They were desirous to bring to us into bondage, that they might glut themselves with the labors of our hands, yea, that they might feast themselves on the flocks of our fields, for it came to pass that King Laman began to stir up his people, that they should contend. We've actually done a jump back, by the way. If
Yeah.
you looked at that time frame, we're now back in Zeniff's day.
Yeah, it's an 80-year flashback.
Yeah, we're back. I need to clear that, and we're describing the terms that created this environment.
So
Now.
we were at Limhi, and now we're talking to what happened to Limhi's grandfather.
Exactly, and I should have made mention of that so you didn't get confused, because we just jumped time frames, jumping into chapter 9. And he says that the Lamanites were a lazy and idolatrous people. Therefore, they were desirous to bring us into bondage that they might glut themselves with our labors in our hands. In other words, they didn't want to work. They didn't want to produce things and do things. They wanted to tax and live their high and mighty lives. Um, Yea, that they might feast themselves on our flocks and our fields. Therefore, they came to pass that King Laman began to stir up his people, that they should contend with my people. Therefore, they began to be wars and contentions in the land. Is that not what has kind of happened in America with this whole two-party system and the way we've gone into contention? The biggest tool that the opponents to our way of life and our thinking do it to create contention so that they can jump in the middle of that contention and create what they want and destroy our way of life. I think this is happening live time. So what is the goal and how does it end? What if I told you that the entertainment field is only popular because it is for the lazy-minded people? I thought that was a great quote. I looked that up. What I'm saying is entertainment's okay as a rest factor, but when it becomes the factor of life,
Games or movies or
sports, you
any of
name it, any idols that you have that begin to take up your life it creates idleness and laziness, and it will end in the destruction of a culture. It's just the outcome. And this quote I see is, I think it's from The Matrix. I could be wrong. But that picture is from The Matrix. That the entertainment field is only popular because it is for the lazy-minded people. What I'm saying is when we only seek to be entertained and we don't seek to do anything or accomplish anything, produce anything, what's the outcome? What's the goal? There is no goal. There's nothing produced. And what ends up is just exactly what I just said. Nothing's produced, and all of a sudden, there's nothing to eat anymore.
Well,
there's no products to function.
To bondage.
It's total bondage, and they lead, and then they have to be subjected to bondage, and that's slavery. It's a cyclical cycle that cultures go through quite often. I mean, the Book of Mormon's full of the prosperity cycle. I know in seminary they taught that to us, how quickly it circles sometimes. And it all comes about too often that we get very comfortable because we've been very productive, we've been very industrious, and then all of a sudden entertainment becomes everything, and we go right back into the lack of production and no productivity and poverty, and it all starts over again. I think the Book of Mormon is full of that. In fact, that was one of the main themes when I went to seminary, was the prosperity cycle that happens. And we're at the upper end of that. We've had a very prosperous time back from World War II on. We had a very industrial time in America, and we've almost come full circle. Many smaller circles within circles, but the big circle is about to round the end.
So are you going to talk about the battle that they fought?
Not a lot. If you want to add something quick.
Just a quick comment. I just want to mention here that because the Lamanites are trying to take the people of Zenith into bondage here, and they are still at this point turning to God and calling on God to deliver them, it says, "Yea, in the strength of the Lord we did go forth to battle against the Lamanites. And God did hear our cries and answer our prayers. And in one day and night we slew 3,043. And it says, but to our great sorrow and lamentation, 279 of our brethren were slain." So again, this isn't a Sinai covenant to a man where God's going to fight the battle and protect them. Like in Isaiah chapter 36, when Hezekiah and they're all faithful and God fights the battle.
Yeah, I was going to say this is, kind of fits exactly what I just said. From World War II, we had our chastening, and then we kind of repented,
And so we won.
Yeah, we
but
won.
we suffered loss.
We suffered
I
loss.
want you to
And
compare this to what happens with Alma's people. The Lord is going to fight the battle.
but
They are not going to have to shed blood to escape.
yeah, and we became here in America quite a God-fearing people for a short time. I mean, I can tell you in my youth, and I'm a baby boomer, okay, meaning I was born from my dad serving in World War II, and he comes home, gets married, and that's a baby boomer. That's who I am, and that whole culture. I mean, we used to be very, very Christian-based society. I mean, when I was growing up, we honored the Sabbath day. We held tight to biblical
I'm
principles.
not saying that there aren't people that honor the Sabbath day. He's talking more of the whole city, the whole nation, right?
Yeah, and I'm just telling you, we did, and I always laugh, and I'm not trying to pick on anything, but Walmart coming to town in Cedar City was the end of the Sabbath in a way. That's really kind of sad, but it was kind of true, because it was open on Sunday, and that was just on a small scale. But that's when things started to change very noticeably. That the Sabbath stopped being kept. It's just fascinating to note. So I want to go into what makes prosperity. Again, spoke.
Prosperity?
There you go, that word. Anyway, and what makes poverty is productivity compared to non-productivity. Real productivity, real goods and services. And it came to pass that we inherit the land of our fathers for many years. Yea, and for the space of 22 years, I did cause that the men should till the ground and raise all manner of grain and all manner of fruit of every kind. This is right after that war she was just talking about. And did cause that women should spin and toil and work in all manner of fine linen, yea, and cloth of every kind, and a mighty clothes our nakedness. And thus we did prosper in the land, and thus we did have continual peace for the space of 22 years. Well, it's, time cycles change. And in a way, we've gone through that even with our recession cycle in America to a degree. But there's these cycles like this on a smaller scale, and then the great big one that encompasses everything. And the big one, the last big drop, was the Depression, which was ended by World War II. But we have these mini cycles along the way, but I think we're about to see the big cycle do another one, the cyclical nature of these things. And I admit I'm getting on the older end of things in my life. So I have seen more history than a lot in my day. And I can tell you, a lot of people say this isn't an exceptional land. Well, it's only an exceptional land in that we follow Christ. And when we did, it was an exceptional land. And as we stop, it's not an exceptional land anymore. And we think we're insulated from these things. I tell you, nay. I love Billy Graham's statement, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again. If God doesn't judge America, he's going to have to apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, that's where we're at in reality. So, and I put this productive. I wanted to show productive. I've actually seen incredible productive farms in my day, where they just on an acre could produce $200,000 worth of revenue in farming.
Yeah, but they cheated. That was Hawaii.
Well, yeah, but still, they had a heck of a system going
Right.
where they could just grow food and cycle crops, and it was beautiful to see productivity at that level. Very, very industrious. And when you see that kind of industrious natures of people, you can't help but become prosperous. And as soon as you get King Laman trying to put you in bondage, and how does that happen? Well, it's when the people become obsessed with entertainment, and they don't want to work anymore.
Are you going to go into the attitude?
Explain where you're going. I'm not.
The wrath, the hatred.
Oh, I am actually. That's the next,
Okay, good.
That's the next.
I
Exact effect of the next
Steal your
slide.
thunder. There you go.
And Now we're going to talk about the Lamanites and why God allows them to bring the Nephites into captivity time and time again.
Well, first we're going to mention that they under Zenith they don't get brought into captivity.
It's not till King Noah.
It's not until you get.
Although they did have to pay the price with a war.
They had to as well. In verse 19 it says, putting their trust in their Lord, they did contend with them face to face.
Okay, so let's just
but
jump.
they're delivered.
We're now in
because they're
chapter
brave.
10 where the war is foremont in the story. In chapter 10, this war that Zenith carries out.
Right.
And they were a wild and ferocious and bloodthirsty people, believing in the traditions of their fathers, which is this. So he's talking about the Lamanites, believing this tradition of their fathers, believing that they were driven out of the land of Jerusalem because of the iniquity of their fathers. So what was Laman and Laman's big cry? Why did we leave Jerusalem? Dad, you're flipped in the head. You know, I think of that song we've sung. Moan, moan, can we go home? Whine, whine, Dad, we think you've lost your mind.
That's from Scripture Scouts.
No. Believing they were driven out of the land of Jerusalem for the iniquities of their fathers. That is actually the tradition the Lamanites had. Now, I want to parallel that to the modern philosophy that is in Gaza today. They believe that they've been driven out because of the iniquity of the Israel. They believe that their whole plight and their whole situation is because they've been abused. And yet they were given Gaza, which is right on the Mediterranean. Circle the Mediterranean. Tell me how many prosperous places are around the Mediterranean when they're busily engaged in good cause. And yet Gaza is in the middle of poverty. And they blame Israel for it. Same story. Repeat of the same story.
I'm just going to say, if it's okay with you, I'm going to just play a little game, and I'm just going to snap my fingers every time you say a certain word as you read this, just to draw attention to it.
Okay. And they were wronged in the wilderness by their brethren. And they were also wronged while they're crossing the sea. And again, they were wronged while the land of their first inheritance.
Just pay attention to it throughout
in the land. And after they crossed the sea and all of this because Nephi was more faithful in keeping the commandments of the Lord. Therefore, he was favored of the Lord, for the Lord heard his prayers and answered them, and took the lead of their journey in the wilderness. So what we're saying here is this mindset of I was wronged.
Be lame.
Be lame. This be lame concept. This Gaza, HAMAS mindset. All of the aid that they received, all that they'd done, all that they could have produced a resort
piece of property
right there on the Mediterranean. Gaza could have been the attraction of the Middle East in a way with all the aid they've received if they wouldn't have used it because of their hatred.
To build a war machine.
Because they believe they're wronged. Wronged. It's this whole blame game. It's sad and unfortunate that people spend so much energy playing to the wronged instead of just being industrious, fixing their situation, taking responsibility for their own future. And that's the difference, I think, you're seeing in all of this. And I know I probably, got a lot of people that are not going to be happy with what I'm saying. And his brethren were wroth with him because they understood not one. Wroth. Yeah.
They feel like they're wronged, so that
then they hate.
Wroth.
The hatred comes. And they were wroth with him because they understood not the dealings of the Lord. They were also wroth with him upon the waters because they hardened their hearts against the Lord. And again, they were wroth with him when they had arrived at the promised land because they said he had taken the ruling out of their hands, meaning we're the older brothers, we should have been in charge. And again, they were wroth with him because he departed into the wilderness, and the Lord had commanded him and took the records and that were engravings on the plates of brass, for they said that he had robbed them. So they're saying that they were wroth.
Nephi, the one who got the plates,
who
robbed them,
honored his father,
It really doesn't make logical sense. It's because it's not logic.
It's not logic.
It's an
just
emotion.
It's an emotional hatred. It's not thought through. It's this plague of feeling wronged, entitlement mentality, and it always ends badly. And yet it's the history of the world. People trying to subject other people because they believe, instead of using all their energy to create their own happiness, they create all their energy focused on what they feel they've been wronged by another.
It's revenge.
It's revenge. It's hatred. It's oh, I am in this condition because I was wronged.
Yeah,
You know,
it's revenge for a perception.
and you could just take so many people who came from almost nowhere, who have totally created an incredible future by their productivity. I mean, and my dad is actually one of them. My dad came back from World War II. His family was, my family was very poor. My grandfather, anyway, was very, very poor. And my dad came back and
Worked hard.
worked hard and took care of us. And he went from being, forgive me, a libetard to a very hard-working believer in productivity and believer that you can make what you want if you choose to. No favors. My dad had no favors. It's just amazing to me. And yet he, in honor and integrity, he worked hard and took care of us and did a great job.
So it's all about taking responsibility
Exactly.
instead of blaming somebody else.
Exactly. Beautiful, beautiful scenario. So I think it's just today playing all back in the scriptures of the Book of Mormon all the time. You can relate every story almost to our current conditions. Now we're in Mosiah 10:17 through 18. And thus they have taught their children that they should hate them, and that they should murder them, and they should rob them and plunder them, and do all they could to destroy them. Therefore they have an eternal hatred toward the children of Nephi. And I could just change that. And thus they taught their children they should hate them, and that they should murder them, and that they should rob and plunder them, and they should destroy them. Therefore they have taught eternal hatred towards the Jews. And for this cause has King HAMAS, whatever, fill in the blank, by his cunning and lying craftiness and his fair promises deceived me, and have brought this my people into this land, and they may destroy them, yea, and we have suffered these many years in this land. So the whole concept of this blame and entitlement mentality is playing out real time right now.
In the context here, I think it's really important to realize that even this picture that you've chosen from the river to the sea, they're not talking about establishing a government of freedom for everyone from the river to the sea. They're talking about genocide,
Yeah.
wiping a people out so that they can be free. The logic
Is beyond comprehension. And when most of you know that we just come back from Israel, and we went to Israel the very night we were getting on the plane. My friend in Jordan was showing me pictures of the missiles flying over his head.
You put it up online.
And we put it up online. The missiles flying over his head headed to Israel. And we're looking at each other like, why did the Lord prompt us to come to Israel right now? I mean, I was asking myself, am I crazy? Are they going to cancel this flight? Are we not going to land in Israel? And I even went to the counter at El Al, and I says, watching the news, is this flight going to get canceled? She says, yeah, I'm still watching the same news. I don't know. And that very night, a miracle happened. And we had several accounts of the miracle of all of those missiles being shot down.
I was just going to say, in Israel, they do not see this as, they see it like a David and Goliath story. That yes, David went out there and he brought his 5 stones.
To fight Goliath.
But the
with
Lord
his big sword and armor.
Goliath. They know that Iron Dome was never supposed to be more effective than 90% on a good day. The fact that over 99% of those missiles were shot down with the help of Great Britain and the US and the Jordanians.
Is a
But
miracle.
the fact
It's a David
that
and Goliath miracle.
none of them got through except for the one that landed in a field and the one little girl that was wounded. Nobody died.
This is,
Another person that we talked to that knew about the missiles that they were shooting down and everything, they said some of these missiles were multi-million-dollar missiles, and that had one of them landed, it could have taken out the whole city of Tel Aviv.
we don't know if that's true or not, but that's what was reported to us.
Right.
Okay.
And that's not all of them. That's some of those missiles.
Yeah, not the bulk of them were drones and cheap shot missiles, but
We heard from multiple sources while we were in Israel that they knew
it was a miracle.
that God had taken out those missiles. Yes, David threw the stone, but the Lord protected them. And they know it.
And it's a David and Goliath story, right here in our day. I mean, it's really fun to see God's hand at play. And we also know that's not because of Israel's righteousness.
Again, yes,
it's because of God executing
timing.
his plan and timing in our day to save his children, to wake as many of us up as they will. And the whole idea, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be,
Palestine
free.
will murder every Jew?
Well, we're going to go kill everybody because that's how it gets free. Oh, come on, really? You know, that they allowed people to come from Gaza every day to work and do whatever until October 7th. They cut off their own head or their own nose to spite their face. It's just amazing to me, the mindset. So once again, I end this conversation. Are we in bondage? Or is this all replaying?
Is this coming to a channel near you?
Yeah, is this coming to a city near you, real soon?
I was just going to read Ezekiel 35, verse 5 again. Because thou hast a perpetual hatred, and hast shed the blood of the children of Israel by the force of the sword in the time of their calamity, in the time that their iniquity had an end. Therefore, as I live, saith the Lord God, I will prepare thee unto blood. And again, he says in Ezekiel 35 and 36 that this is not because the people are righteous to a man.
It's because he's jealous of his name. And he is determined to save as many of us as will come. That's his mission.
And the reason
And eventually we will all come to a degree, almost, except for perdition.
And the reason God allows judgment, like Limhi and his people are in this situation, is to save them.
Exactly. To wake them up, to wake us up. I mean, that is where we're at. So I'll let you answer all the questions that we propose here. And we'll end with, God bless you. And we are grateful for this opportunity. I hope this causes you to ponder, causes you to pray, and causes you to come home to your Lord and Savior in this most glorious and wonderful time. And I say that really. I used to not. I used to think, oh man, in last days, prophecy, end times. Oh no. This is going to be the greatest performance that God has ever launched. God bless. Till next time.
You might want to edit out libetard.
I'd like it.